just ask that you would tonight just be with all the little ones next door, and to the teachers and helpers and workers, and be with us, Lord, as we study your word. I pray that you would just prepare our hearts for it. Now, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. All right, well, we're continuing in our study here with Nehemiah. And we know that he has just a little bit of a summary here to get things started. He's received word about the state and condition of his home country, where his ancestors, where his family was, and he's burdened about this. There's been a report given to him about the state, the condition. It's basically in shambles. It's a very difficult thing to hear. And so he's burdened about it. He's burdened, and he prays through about what he should do. And as we've talked about, in his condition and in his place of what he was doing, he was the cupbearer for King Artaxerxes, and he had a very important role. And the cupbearer was the one that tested the things that went to the king. He was right there with the king always. Had to have a smile on his face, even when things were difficult for him or he wasn't having the best of days, he had to have a smile on his face. He had to be well presented, had to be well dressed as he was there with the king. So he heard this word, and he developed a burden. He got really concerned, and he wanted to do something about it. He said, I've got to do something. So, like we've talked about, he did things the right way. He didn't just one night just decide to head out and go and help the individuals, but he prayed about this. He had planned this, and over the time period, the Lord had laid on his heart about what to do, and he prepared himself as he went to the king, and he presented himself to the king, and the king said, what are you so sad about, Nehemiah? And he said, my people, the people there are in a state of ruin. They are utterly have been destroyed, the place of Judah and Jerusalem, the sepulchres of my fathers. And so, like we mentioned before, God working behind the scenes, He allowed Nehemiah to go. And Nehemiah was a very smart individual, I believe. Obviously, he was a man that had a heart after God. He pursued that. But also, I think he was smart, because in that time period of him preparing, he did a lot of investigating. He did a lot of things that were necessary in preparation for what lied ahead. He knew what he needed to grab. He knew what he needed to develop. He knew, and remember we talked about last week when he came before the king, a psychological thing about how could a king play down the importance of a dead and respecting of the dead. So here we see that Nehemiah has been given the okay to go. So here he begins his journey. He journeys, he's got a caravan, and like Ezra, a little different there. As we know, we hope we always learn from our previous mistakes. But here he goes in the caravan, and they're led to the place there, and he sees Jerusalem with his own eyes. Like I mentioned last week, it's a very interesting, this is one of my favorite books in the Bible, Nehemiah. I believe as he ventured around the walls, I believe as he ventured around Jerusalem and Judah there, I believe as he was surveying, and remember he did this at night as he surveyed the damage, surveyed all things, I almost can imagine that he was a little teary-eyed as he walked around, because Jerusalem was supposed to be this beautiful, this glorious, this magnificent place, but here it is in shambles. And so he walks around and he surveys the damage, and he says, okay, this is what needs to happen. But you know, when you have a good plan set together and you've got everything in place, I don't know if y'all remember the TV show The A-Team. Hannibal used to say always, he said, I love it when a plan comes together. But here we see that as we look at this situation, he's got this plan, he's got it all in place, what's supposed to happen. But when we think we've got it all together and it looks like things are starting to finally gel, who comes knocking at the door? Trouble. So he has these individuals, these three, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. They come, and what do? They start to try to discourage Nehemiah. And Nehemiah, basically, what do you know what he tells them? He says, you have no part in this. You have no part in this that is for the glory of God. And so he comes to chapter number 3, and we see the beginning of the rebuilding of the wall. Now, this chapter is a very interesting chapter, and as you read through it, there's a lot of names that you can get hung up on, a lot of names that you can possibly say many, many times over again, but still get hung up on them and mispronounce them. It's just very easy to do. But Nehemiah had a great challenge ahead of him, an important task. But the most important thing about Nehemiah was that he had a great faith in God. His faith is so important. Our faith is so important because it is without faith, it is impossible to please God. See, he would have accomplished very little in his task. Now, one person can do some, and one person can make a difference, obviously. But he had to have some help. This wasn't some just little 4 walls that they're trying to build. I mean, the city there was pretty long. It was a big, huge area that needed to be repaired. And he needed help. He needed people that would help him rebuild, that would help him fix this back to the way that it was. He needed help. One of my favorite stories comes from, and I think I may have shared this before, I have in different occasions, about people that have played key roles in my life to help me be who I am, and you have those same individuals that have been in your life. Coach Fisher DeBerry, he used to coach the Air Force Academy football team. Great Christian man. I met him several years ago, and in his office, he had a picture behind his desk of a turtle up on a fence post. And everybody would ask him, why in the world do you have a turtle up on a fence post in your office, especially on the wall? He said, good question. He said, important thing to learn is that turtle didn't get there on his own. And the thing is that with us in life and how that we are able to accomplish things, in order for us to be successful, in order for us to do the things that are important, you need help to get to where you need to be. You have to have help. That turtle needed help. He couldn't jump up there. He couldn't fly up there. Somebody had to put him up on that post. And the same thing with you. You had to have people that were instrumental in helping you to find success and be where you need to be. And so we find here that Nehemiah led, and this is important for like leaders. He led with an act of humility, which is his obvious creed for the people. This is talked about in Nehemiah 4:6. He said the people had a mind to work. They were focused. They were all in. They had bought into what he had challenged them to do, and here they are. They had the mind to work. But you know, it's not easy to get people to work, is it? We find that out in our culture today. A lot of people don't want to work. They want everything handed to them on a silver platter. Here it is. Take it. This is what people expect. British humorist Jerome K. Jerome said, I like work. It fascinates me. I can sit and look at it for hours. And see, that's the thing that we see oftentimes with work and with wanting something to be done. People will say, oh, I want this to be done. I want this to happen. But are they willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work? Are we willing to get on our hands and knees and, work in the garden? If you're going to get in the garden or if you're going to go work in your flower bed, you got to get on your hands and knees really to get in there and do the work. Are you willing to get on your hands and knees and really get in there and do some hard work? That's an important thing. And this is what had to happen in order for this to take place, for these walls to be rebuilt, for these gates to be restored. I mean, it just had to be like that. See, the work of the Lord has no place for spectators, but there is room always for workers. Room for work to be done. So tonight I want us to look at 4 different things about this chapter here, the rebuilding of the walls. Number 1, let's look at the purpose of the work. See, Nehemiah was concerned about, and he was concerned for the glory of God. Nehemiah 2:17 says, "Let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach." He said, this has got to end. This has got to stop. We can no longer be a reproach. We must be for the glory of God. And this was Nehemiah's message. Now, don't you think for a moment that as the outsiders were looking at the state of Jerusalem, they were looking at the state of the walls, the gates there, that they often maybe laughed, that they mocked the Jews because of the dilapidated condition of Jerusalem? Why is that? Because Jerusalem, like what was mentioned earlier, and we've talked about this before, it was supposed to be a glorious place, a magnificent place. If God loved Jerusalem so much, and if this was true that this is His people, why were the walls in ruin? And why were the gates burned? Good question. Why? They probably thought to themselves, you say you're God's people, but look at the state of your walls and your gates. You know, oftentimes I think the world does that to the church. The world pretty much ignores the church today. There's no respect anymore. I mean, you watch things, sin is just blatantly exposed on TV and exposed within our culture. The things that we were shameful of 20 years ago are the things today that people are proud of. And so when the world looks at the church today, they just pretty much say, oh, they can do their thing. We're going to do our thing. There's no absolutes. We live in a postmodern world. A postmodern world believing that there are no absolutes. But the fact of the matter is, there has to be absolutes. There has to be a simple truth. And the truth that we believe in from God's Word is that the Bible tells us how we're to live our lives. The Bible tells us how that we are to conduct ourselves. And the Bible also tells us that there is one truth for us, and that is Jesus, who said He is the way, the truth, and the life. So as we look at that, the world, as they look at the church, it's oftentimes just ignored and oftentimes mocked. And oftentimes they'll say, well, why are there scandals in the church? Why is there all of these unethical things that pop up in the church of leaders who expose themselves, having these affairs and people stealing money and all these things? And the simple fact of the matter is that it does happen. It does happen, but it does not define the church. You know, that's what people do often. They'll have one bad experience at one church and they won't go to any other churches. And you know why? It's because they think they're all the same. Not all churches are the same. They're not. The fact of the matter is, you cannot allow one experience to define your walk with the Lord. One person said it like this. They said, out of the billions and billions of people we have living in the world today, oftentimes people will allow one out of those billions to ruin their experience of life. What do I mean by that? They let their actions, they let their thoughts about them ruin who that they could actually be. Hey, don't allow that to happen to you. We got so much to live for. God created us for His glory. If somebody's mad at you, if somebody's mocking you, that's okay. You got 10 more that probably like you more. So don't worry about it. Just move on. Keep going. You're always going to have those individuals that mock you, that want to ridicule you for what you believe in. I mean, I do. I mean, standing and proclaiming truth. There'll be always people that do that. But remember, Jesus said, before they despised you, they despised me. So remember that. That's an important truth to hang on to. But the rebuilding of the walls and the setting of the gates also proved an important purpose as well. This meant protection and security for the people. Jerusalem was surrounded by enemies. I mean, the Israelites were always fighting foreigners. They were always fighting those individuals that were challenging them and had their false gods. But Jerusalem was surrounded by enemies, and it seemed foolish for the residents to improve their property when nothing was safe from invasion and plunder. And over the years, the citizens had possibly got accustomed to their plight, to their situation. And they probably thought to themselves, this is just the way that it's going to be. Now, I don't know about you, but if I bought something and it's really expensive and it means a lot to me, I'm going to make for certain that it's behind walls and it's locked up, aren't you? Because we live in a world where people just steal. I mean, we've had theft at church. Even at churches that I've served in the past, there has been theft. It's just because we live in a broken world, a sinful world. And it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. But the purpose of the work was to give them this feeling of security. And here we see here that Nehemiah arrived on the scene and he challenged them to rebuild the city to the glory of God. I could almost imagine him just being this individual that walks in and says, all right, listen, I know you're in this state. I know the walls are in the state they are. I know the gates are in the shape that they are. I know that it's been a rough road. I know it's been difficult. But we can do this. And they're probably thinking, like I said before, well, Ezra, I tried already. Nehemiah said, let's do this. Let's do it. Let's build. And so there was a purpose of the work that he had set out for. But also the pattern of the work. Let's look at this. Now, Nehemiah planned his work and worked his plan. That goes along with the thought that I shared a week ago about if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so Nehemiah planned his work, and here he goes. He's got it all written down. He's got it all, just follow me here. He's got all these things situated here, and he's ready to get to work. And so here we find out in this chapter as well that 38 individual workers are named in this chapter. 38 individual. 42 different groups are identified. And there were also many workers whom Nehemiah did not name, whose labors were also very important to the task. Each worker, name and anonymous, were assigned a place and a task. You know, it's just like in the church. Not everybody can be the preacher. Not everybody can be the youth leader. Not everybody can be a deacon. You know, there's roles that we have in the church that are important. And there's roles also. There's the roles for the individuals that need to work with the children. There's roles for people who need to do certain things that we're all called to do. We're all called to do things differently, but every task is important. Very important. You know, D.L. Moody once said this, a great many people have got a false idea about the church. They've gotten an idea that the church is a place to rest in, to get into a nicely cushioned pew, and contribute to the charities, listen to the minister, and do their share to keep the church out of bankruptcy is all they want. The idea of work for them, actual work in the church, never enters their mind. That's D.L. Moody saying that, and he said that a long, long time ago. But it's still relevant for today. How is that? Because it's true. I mean, oftentimes we can come and we can hear the good music. Heard a preacher say this once before. He said, we come hear the good music. Oh, we get all warm and fuzzy, and then we get a little warm in here, a little hot when it's cold outside. The preacher gets up there. The preacher gets up, starts to preach. Before he knows it, he looks back, and all the heads are back as they're all asleep, prepared for the invitation and to go home. But there's so much more to church. There's so much more to serving. There's so much more of what it's all about. And so here we see that these individuals played an important role. And as we look at this, we also see that Paul spoke about this as well in 1 Corinthians 12 and 14, chapters 12 and 14. Paul compared individual Christians to members of the human body. And each member is important and each has a special function to perform. See, when you miss, the body misses you. When you're out, you're missed. That's why I always tell our deacons when we meet, I say, give someone a Sunday off if they miss, give them benefit of a doubt. If they're out too, check on them. All right? Be checking on them, seeing how they're doing, seeing what's going on. And we need to, because we are part of a family here. And when you're out, you're missed. And that's important. But here we see the people finish this difficult task because of one important thing. Because they obeyed the same leader, kept their eyes on the same goal, and worked together for the glory of God. Neither the enemy outside the city nor the difficulties inside the city distracted them from their God-given task. I mean, they were determined. Nehemiah gave the challenge, and here they go. Now, the word built, if you look at it, it's often see here in the King James, it's also builded. As we look at built, is used 6 times in Nehemiah chapter 3, and it means rebuilt. Okay? And then also we use the word repair. It's used 35 times, and it means to make strong and firm. And so Nehemiah wasn't interested in quick fix. He wasn't like going up and he was saying, all right, guys, we need a little structure here. Let's just brace this. It'll be all right. Let's do this. Let's just make for certain that this is okay and it doesn't fall anymore. No, he wasn't interested in a quick fix, a Band-Aid. He was ready to go in there and do things for the glory of God. See, when we do things for the glory of God, we don't half do it. We give it our best. You know, one preacher said it like this. He said, oftentimes, you feel like in ministry and for the work of the Lord gets the scraps from the table. You know, like the dog does. You know, Fido up there wagging his tail barking. He wants the crumbs. He wants what's left. And I'm not giving him my food, okay? But he wants the crumbs. But oftentimes that's how we are, though. We want to just give the crumbs, what's left, to the Lord when we should be giving Him our best. And that's for me too. I'm just speaking to myself here. I'm not speaking out saying I'm perfect at this. But I'm just saying that this is what God expects. And so here we see with Nehemiah, they get to work. Also, locks and bars are mentioned 5 times in Nehemiah chapter 3. And locks refers to the sockets in which bars were fitted, thus making it difficult for anyone outside to outside to find the gates. It wasn't enough that they simply do the work of God, but they also must make for certain that it is protected from the enemy. That's important. That's just simply put a smart thing to do, because you want to make for certain that this is fortified, that it is safe, it is protected. Like when you build a house, all of us know that when you build a house, you got to have a door and you have a place for a lock on your door. Why is that? For safety. Sometimes people will put alarm system in their home. It's a thing of safety for protection against the evilness of the world. 2 John verse number 8 says, "Look to yourselves, that we lose not those things which we have wrought, but that we receive a full reward." Don't lose those things that you know that you have. Be smart about it. Be quick to do things that are going to help prevent that. So here we see the pattern of the work, the purpose and the pattern, but also let's look at the people in the work. And we're going to get to reading some here in a minute. But when examining the various people in Nehemiah chapter 3, it's often easy to compare to today's church, the relation, the connection, the parallel between the two. How is that? Well, first of all, God uses all kinds of people. All kinds of people. In verse 1 through 12 through 19, he used priests, rulers and priests. Verse 12 talks about they used men and women. Professional craftsmen who, in verse 8 and 32, people outside the city actually were called in to help with the efforts according to verse 2, verse 5, and verse number 7. There was a job for everybody to do. There was a job for people to get involved and to help out. But not only God uses all kinds of people, but also leaders must set the example. Look what it says here in verse number 1 of chapter 3. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests, and they builded the sheep gate. They sanctified it and set up the doors of it, even unto the tower of Mia. They sanctified it unto the tower of Haniel. Now, if anyone should have been busy, it was the priests, because they should have been the leaders. They should have been the ones up there praying and helping for the glory of God to be involved in this project. Now, the high priest used his concentrated hands to do manual labor. And what did this show? It showed that he considered the work on the wall to be the ministry of the Lord, for all of this to take place, for all of this to happen. Now, Eliashib enlisted the other priests to work at the sheep gate in the northeast corner of the city. And since the sacrifices came into the city that way, and we'll get to that in a little bit because we're going to talk about the different gates. But since the sacrifices came into the city that way, the priest would have been especially interested in that part of the project. And why is that? Because that was important to them. This was part of what they did. So they would have saw that as an important thing to get done. Sad to say, though, however, Eliashib did not remain true to his calling. For we find out later that he allied with the enemy and created issues for Nehemiah later on in the story. Part of that was because Eliashib's grandson married a daughter of Sanballat in verse number 28, and the alliance, no doubt, caused a big, huge squabble, because you're going to side with family even when it means that it's not the right thing to do. And so Eliashib later on causes an issue. But also, not only God uses all kinds of people, but leaders must set the example, but also in the work, sometimes there's going to be some people who will not work. Look at what it says here in Nehemiah 3, verse number 5. And next unto them, the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord. Tekoites, or however you want to say that. You say that a million times over and over again, you'll probably say it a little different each time. Who are they? Tekoites. Who are they? Well, a little about Tekoa. Tekoa was a town about 11 miles from Jerusalem. And some of their people traveled to Jerusalem to assist with the work. Remember, I talked about that there was outsiders who assisted in the work here with the rebuilding. Now, what a contrast between these people and their nobles, though, as we hear and see in this verse. The Tekoites built in two places on the wall. We see here verse number 5 and verse 27 is where they built. And while their nobles refused to bend the neck and work in one place, they was so important at their eyes that they could not perform. What was so important in their eyes that they could not perform manual labor? And when we think about that, oftentimes you're just going to find people that will say, I'm just not going to do the work. Sadly to say, I have heard in the past that I'm above that work. And that's a sad comment to make. Think about this just for a moment. The greatest preacher of all time, the Apostle Paul, he was a tent maker. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Savior of the world, was a carpenter. So we're not above anything. I mean, we're all called to serve. But the Tekoites were not only outsiders to Jerusalem, were not the only outsiders to go to Jerusalem to work on the wall. For men also came from Jericho, Gibeon, and Mizpah. Their loyalty to their nation and their Lord was greater than their local interest, and they were certainly safer back in their own communities, but they risked their lives to do the work of the Lord. You know, how often is it that we risk something for the work of the Lord? I mean, you know what happens often, and it's happened to me. I'm transparent here with you tonight. If it's convenient for me, I'll serve. If it's convenient for my time or my efforts, I'll do it. But here we see that not only that, but we see that some people will not work, but also some people do more work than others. Listen to these verses. Let's read all these together. We've got verse 11, 19, 21, 24, 27, and 30. We'll read all these. Malchijah, the son of Haram, and Hashub, the son of Petham Moab. Remember, I'm telling you here, it's hard when you read these names all together here. Repaired the other piece in the tower of the furnaces. Then we go here to verse 19. And next to him repaired Ezra, the son of Jeshua, the ruler of Mizpah, and another piece over against the going up to the armory at the turning of the wall. Also here, verse number 21. After him repaired Meremoth, the son of Urijah, the son of Cuz, another piece from the door of the house of Elishib, even to the end of the house of Elishib. Then verse 24 says, after him repaired Benui, the son of Henadad, another piece from the house of Azariah, under the turning of the wall, even under the corner. Verse 27, after them the Tekoites repaired another piece over against the great tower that lieth out, even under the wall of Ophel. Then verse 30, after him repaired Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanan, the sixth son of Zaloth, another piece. After him repaired Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, over against his chamber. Now, what's the importance of reading theirs? Well, most workers are glad to lay down their tools when their job is finished. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, they're ready just to call it a day. Let's lay those tools down, and I'm not picking them back up until the next job the next day. But these people ask for additional assignments. What? You know, you're getting ready, you finished up, and they're like saying, what's next? What do we do? You're like, what do we do next? What's the next task? You know, it isn't enough for us to say that we've done as much as others. We must do as much as we can, as long as we can, as long as the Lord enables us to. I'm reminded in Matthew 5:47, this is part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaching here on loving your enemies. He said, it's easy to do that. It's easy to do certain things, but it's hard to really love those who do you wrong. He said, because even the wicked oftentimes can do some of these same things that you think are easy to do. But then he comes here and he says in Matthew 5:47, and I've preached a sermon on this before, because if you look at all the religions in the world today, like the Suddas, they're a group that believes in a false god, and they're part of like the Hindu, and some of these individuals worship these animal gods, and these individuals, true thing here, they will stand looking up at the sun, and they will stare into the sun until it burns the retina out of their eye, because they think that's the thing to do. Those that'll fly and hijack planes and fly them into World Trade Centers and buildings to destroy and kill people because they believe in Allah and that it will give them some enlightenment and that they'll have all these things in the afterlife, which is all false. It's not true. That's not the God that I believe here. Allah is not God. And the thing is that we see that these individuals, though, are so devoted to what they believe, but they're not right. But you know, some of these groups, though, they'll be nice. They'll do things. They'll help the community. But Jesus says here, He says, what? What do ye more than others? And what does that mean as a Christian? What do we do more than the world? The world does a lot of great things for organizations. But what do we as Christians do that's more than others? How do we respond to situations? When the world looks at our lives and an individual looks at how you respond to situations, it should baffle them. because your response should be that's not the same as the world. It should be something that is totally foreign to them. They'll ask you, how in the world can you forgive someone when they hurt you and wrong you? How can you do that? Simply put, you say, the Bible tells me that I am to forgive as I have been forgiven. You know, that's something that's foreign because people think, well, you just ought to hold a grudge. You ought to do this and do that. But you're saying here, what do ye more than others? What do you do more? Now, so it says here, some people do more of the work than others, but also some people work harder than others. Look at verse number 20 with me. It says, after him, Baruch. I like that name, don't you? That's just one of those names you can really get into, like Baruch. But verse 20 says, after him, Baruch, the son of Zabbai, earnestly repaired the other piece from the turning of the wall into the door of the house of Elishib, the high priest. Now, Baruch is the only worker of whom it is said that the work was done what? Earnestly. Now, the Hebrew word earnestly means to burn or glow with desire for your project. I can imagine Baruch out there working. He's like, guys, all right. He said, some are saying, hey, it's almost time for a little break here. He says, all right, no, we got to turn this harder. Let's go. Let's get this done. You know, I could almost imagine just that earnest to repair the other piece. He was just an individual that had that burning desire within inside of him. And it suggests also that Baruch had a lot of energy. You know, maybe every day before work he had a couple of Red Bulls or something. I don't know. But, you know, you have that individual on the work site. It's like go, 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 and then they crash there. But I don't think Baruch crashed. I believe he was just like that. He was earnestly wanting to get the job done. See, even Solomon talked a little bit about this in Ecclesiastes 9:10. He said, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with what? Thy might. Do it to the best of your ability. Important. All right, well, let's look at this last part here. And this is where we're going to cover the gates. This is the places that needed the repairs. The places of work. So Nehemiah begins his list of the workstations. He's got everybody. He's got his workers. He says, okay, this is what needs to happen, and this is what they're going to do. So he starts with the sheep gate in the northeast corner of the city. He then moves counterclockwise around the walls to the gate of Hamakad, the muster gate, which is adjacent to the sheep gate and just above the east gate. This is recorded in Nehemiah 3, verse number 29. So here we go. Let's talk about each one of these gates and why they're significant. Well, first of all, the sheep gate. Where you're thinking like, okay, it's the sheep gate. Sheep go through it. Well, here we see it's recorded in verse number 1 and also ends in verse number 32 about how that it starts there and then it ends back with the sheep gate. So animals were brought here, and also this was a place for the temple sacrifices. This was a place where they were brought in. Now this is near the temple. Logical for this to be near the temple. Why? Because these were temple sacrifices. It would have made sense for them to have been there. And they were to make this a priority. Now this is important. Something for you to take note of. This is the only gate that was sanctified. Important. And also, he chose to start and finish here. Now, when I think about this, the beginning and the end, what else do we think about the beginning and the end? Jesus said, I am the Alpha and I am the Omega. I am the first and I am the last. And I think about that often when I think about starting with the sheep gate and then ending back with the sheep gate again. So there we find that one. Let's move to the fish gate. We go from the sheep, we go to the fish. So here we go, the fish gate. Nehemiah 3:3. It says, but the fish gate did the sons of Hassaniah build, who also laid the beams thereof and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. Now this was west of the sheep gate. And the tower of Mia and Haniel were there in between these two gates. And the towers there were significant because these were towers of defense for the city. They needed to be there to protect against the enemy that was to come. Now, the merchants used this gate when bringing fish from the Mediterranean Sea. It's very likely, we don't know 100% for sure, but it's possible that there could have been a fish market that was there. I mean, you got fish, so you'd have people that were selling the fish there. And with fish, that probably had to be a place that just had a unique smell. Because with fish, a lot of it there, you would just really pick up on that when it was there. So that's talking about that gate there. Also, let's talk about the old gate. And this was a possible corner gate, northwest corner of the city. This is where that would have been. Also, the valley gate. This is where Nehemiah actually began his investigation of the city. He began here at this gate. The southwest corner, about 500 yards from the dung gate. But it says here, not only restored the gate, but repaired a section of the wall between two gates. It's possible that there was over 1,700 feet of wall there that was not that bad. So with all the destruction, it's likely that there were some portions that weren't as bad as others, even though it seems like it was just in complete shambles. So it's possible that could have been the situation there. Also, let's look at next the dung gate. This is in verse 14. Let's go to verse 14 here. It says, "But the dung gate repaired Malchiah, the son of Rechab, the ruler, a part of Beth Hakkereim." There's a good one there. "He built it and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof." Now this was located near the pool of Siloam, and exit to the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, that Jesus spoke of often. All right. Now this would have actually been the place for waste to be carried through. Now Jesus referred to the valley of Hinnom, and we know in the Greek that's Gehenna, as the place that waste was taken care of, and it was burned. It was like a continuous burning. And he referred that to hell and talking about just the valley of Hinnom, the Gehenna, the lake of fire, the continuous burning that would take place. But this was another gate that was also repaired. But also the fountain gate. This was the east wall near the pool of Siloam. And this is where spring water was fed. And this was a spring water system. And this was important too for the restoration of the building. The water gate. Interesting enough, Jerusalem was not built near a great river. So there had to be some system that funneled in, some type of cistern, some type of way for water to get in. And so that's important as well. Now, one thing that's important here is it doesn't say it was repaired. Only walls adjacent to it were repaired. So another thing here, that not everything was completely destroyed. So there could have been places that were not as bad as others. The Ophel wall, this is verse 26, 27. Let's read that one. "Moreover, the Nethiums dwelt in Ophel under the place over against the water gate toward the east, and the tower that lieth it. After them, the Tekoites repaired another piece over against the great tower that lieth out even of the wall of Ophel." Now, this was a hill south of the temple, and temple servants lived there. This was a place to where that they could live, they could be protected, and so this would have been a place that they could have stayed. Also, we look here to the horse gate. This is verse 28. "From above the horse gate repaired the priest every one against his house." Now, this was north of Watergate, not the scandal, we know, but it's just north of the Watergate. And so here, an important thing. Remember my sermon I preached a couple weeks ago about the woman who almost ended Christmas? Athaliah was executed here. 2 Chronicles 23, verse number 18. And the important thing about the horse gate was that Solomon was the one who actually introduced horses as a way of transportation, as a way of an effective way for military purposes. And this was actually imported from Egypt. So this is something that he brought in, that he developed. So that's important as well. But this was the horse gate. The east gate, verse number 27, it says, After them, the Tekoites repaired another piece over against them, the great tower that lieth out, even to the wall of Ophel. Now, this led directly to the temple, and this is something that's important because the Golden Gate tradition says that Jesus entered the temple on Palm Sunday through this actual gate. So that is very, very important as we look at that. And also, it's said that in the 16th century that this actual gate was blocked in. There was some religious zealots and religious groups that actually blocks this in. And Ezekiel actually said that the glory of the Lord departed from the temple here. And it's also believed that here is where the Lord will return to the city when He returns. And this is very important. This is all prophecy that will be fulfilled, obviously. But also we see here the gate Hamathekah. This is verse 31. It says, after him repaired Malachiah, the goldsmith's son, unto the place of Nethiums and the merchants, over against the gate Mithkad, and to the going up of the corner. Now this was the northwest corner, and many believe that this was a military reference, that this would have been a place that the army would have been reviewed and registered. This would have been a place for a check down, to evaluate weapons, to evaluate whatever needed to be happened, to strengthen up things, tighten things, repair weapons, whatever it could have been. And this was done because of the vulnerability of the actual wall in this location. So this was a good place for an army. This was a good place to be checked. This was a good place to be prepared in case the enemies were to come, so they could be prepared to fight in case that were to happen. And so in verse 32 it says, and between the going up of the corner under the sheep gate repaired the goldsmiths and the merchants. So here we see, it starts with the sheep gate, it goes all the way around, and it gives the report, all the work's being done, and then it ends back with the sheep gate again. And a lot of people had to be involved for it to happen. It's just like when we have church in the park. It takes a lot of people to make that happen. It takes a lot of people. You got to have your burger people. You got to have your cake people. You got to have your Coke people. You got to have your Dr. Pepper people too. All right? But you got to have everybody in their places to do the work so that it can happen. Your chair people, your table people, your sound people, your microphone people, your note people. The preacher's got to bring his Bible people. I mean, like, it's just, everything has to have a job and a task. And Nehemiah do that, and here it is. It's planned. They're working, and they're working to get this built back. And this is what happens here. Really neat when you think about it. Nehemiah was a great planner. He was a great organizer. And I think this is an excellent book on just being an effective leader, how important it is to be informed, being prepared, and doing what you need to do to make for certain to get people steered in the right direction. And I think that's what we see in this book. And it's going to be good. All right? So, all right. What y'all got? Y'all have anything? I know I rushed through those gates, but there's so much more you can talk about, but I just wanted to hit on very briefly each one of those. So. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Wonder about old Baruch, if when Nehemiah came and he gave the orders, wonder if he was up front just saying like, let's get it going. Let's get it going. I think Baruch was one of those individuals earnestly. He stands out to me, and that's interesting. He's the only one that's described for, that earnestness to get the work done, to get that completed. Yeah. That's something that thrills my heart too. When we ask for people to help, like, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'm ready. Often we don't see that a lot. But, it is an encouraging thing when you have people that want to step up and help and serve and are willing. And but great. I love this book. I know I said that, but I like reading through it. It's an encouragement for me, just going through it again. And hopefully it is for you. That's right. Yeah. I think it was Mr. T that always said that there is a T in team, though. Mr. T. I love that show, The A-Team. I ain't watched the episode in a long time. It's a good little show. It was back from the 80s. Yeah. Anybody else with a thought? Anything? All right. Appreciate you. Thank you being here tonight. And we're going to continue on this. And I'm having a good time going through it. Hopefully you are too. Hopefully see you Sunday, Lord willing. If we don't have any snow or anything happen, we'll be here Sunday. And like I mentioned in the prayer request, please remember Carol's family. Just really on my heart right now for them. So say a special prayer for their whole family if you wouldn't mind.
Is she with her son in Knoxville or the one here?
No, she's at her house actually. Yeah, and one of her sons, can't recall his name right now, but he stays with Carl. Yeah, Carl stays with her. Yeah, but yeah, she looked pretty bad last night. I think that's the probably worst I've seen her. So. All right, let's go ahead and we'll stand together and we'll pray. Father, thank you for this opportunity to be here this evening. Thank you for your word. Thankful for the opportunity to revisit the book of Nehemiah again and journey through that with everyone else and be encouraged by what transpired there. Also, Father, we pray for Carol, pray for her family, pray for all those that have been on our list this evening, those on our hearts tonight. And we pray for safety as we travel home. Thank you for Jesus, your Son, and we ask all these things in His name. Amen.